Okay, then again, welcome to everyone. Happy to be here. Thanks for coming, and thanks for being invited. I go a little bit into the direction that also has been addressed by our previous speaker, but I will focus a little bit more on the interaction of diet and health and gut microbiota. So maybe a bit similar as what was earlier the door to the West and St. Louis. Maybe a new paradigm shift is not only to think of diet by itself, but maybe with a link to gut microbiota. So maybe instead of go west, go gut. We will see a bit to that in the next slides. So what we have on the menu for the next couple of minutes is a few words about why we should care about what we eat. We will look a little bit into what are gut microbiota and maybe why you are more gut microbiota than you might be human. We talk a bit about the interaction of gut microbiota and our diet and try to sum up with some more general conclusions. First of all, why should we care what we eat? There are some good reasons for that, and if you look at some of the most recent statistics, such as published by the Lancet Commission that dive into a bit details about health problems related to what we are eating. We have a lot of problems because people, they consume too much sodium, so there are more than 3 million deaths and more than 70 million DALYs, which is disability adjusted life years that are lost due to just too high salt consumption. This is about the same for not consuming enough whole grains, so 3 million deaths and more than 80 million disability-adjusted life years lost to that. If you don't eat enough fruits worldwide, or in these 195 countries that were investigated, there are about 2 million deaths attributed just to not eating enough fruits, and over 60 million DALYs. And if you compare this is in a similar area compared to those people who are suffering health problems or mortalities from ischemic heart disease. So quite large and significant numbers. The World Health Organization has estimated in a similar direction that not consuming enough fruits and vegetables cause about 14% of gastrointestinal cancers. Over 30%, almost a third of ischemic heart diseases and heart deaths, and about 10% of the strokes that we are facing. And that's not enough to add insult to injury. If you look at the socioeconomic consequences as well, there are some quite costs associated to that. It has been estimated in Canada that not eating enough fruits cost about 3.3 billion Canadian dollar per year taxpayers' money that has to go in addition to the health system. And not consuming or not following the recommendations for the 8 major food groups even kind of amounts to 14 billion Canadian dollar per year. If you try to make the math and go for the population from Canada and extrapolate this down to Luxembourg, you see that we have maybe 60 million euros in Luxembourg or 250 million euros respectively for not eating enough fruits and vegetables and not following major health recommendations, which is quite a significant number. So just more fruits and vegetables for all? Well, maybe yes, but maybe it's not just as simple as that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of inter-individual variations between people. So what you throw in on the left-hand side is not necessarily translated in the same person on the right-hand side to health outcomes, here cardiometabolic health benefits, as has been highlighted in one of our recent cost actions, positive, that looked at inter-individual variabilities and how different phytochemicals or secondary plant components, polyphenols, carotenoids that you consume in your diet, what is in between the intake and the health outcome. And in the middle, we have a lot of different aspects that go from epigenetics of people, your gender, your age, your environment, possibly where you're living as well. And of course, also the gut microbiota, or in short, we have all these exposome factors that are in between in the interaction of what you throw in and what you can expect to be on the outcome or the health benefit or the health deteriorative factor. So unfortunately, it looks like that there's not a one-size-fits-all kind of diet for everyone, just because everyone has these different factors from environment to own genetic factors. And that's even recognized by the National Institute of Health in the US, who put precision health as one of the #1 priorities about to come in the next couple of decades. So possibly we go from what we have now, choose myplate.gov, to something that maybe looks a bit more complicated on the right-hand side, the plate, where you have to take maybe into account metabolomics, different attributes, dietary habits, nutrigenomics, and of course also your gut microbiota, as we will see more on the next slide. If you are maybe familiar, maybe this is what you learned a long time ago in the school, the old food pyramid from the USDA in the 70s. Then come this one, which also tried to include here physical activity. Then we had a couple of other modifications to myplate.gov without going into detail. But there are also now some pyramids that have tried to incorporate a bit the point of view from the microbiota side. So you have at the bottom, not too amazing, fruits and vegetables, rich in dietary fiber, food for your microbiota, to kind of highlight this. And this has been highlighted by some of the health associations that the classical food pyramid, rich in fruits and vegetables, is actually also good for your gut microbiota. So this goes possibly toward more targeted approaches to, of course, increase a healthy gut in microbiota environment. So why is your gut important? Think about it. Who are you? Let's talk a bit about numbers. So first of all, the gut microbiota resides mostly in the colon, the large intestine, to a smaller amount in the small intestine. There are also some fungi, but mostly it's bacteria, if you disregard all the viruses that outnumber the bacteria in your gut also by manifold. In your body, you have about 37 times 10 to the power of 12, so a trillion cells, quite a lot. But actually you have at least the same number, if not more, bacteria in your gut than you carry around human cells. And worse, kind of, if you think about the number of different genes that you carry, you are outnumbered by your bacterial genes by a number 150. So in the end, you could kind of state that you might be more bacteria than you think. So think again, who am I? It's not so easy actually to say. What do bacteria do in the gut? So they're just not sitting there passively. They have to follow a lot of functions that can be health beneficial. They protect us from harmful invaders. Think about Clostridium difficile infections, for example. Talking about the immune system, they're important for gut barrier, protecting us from allergens, partly maybe cleaving compounds down, protect us from maybe cancerous lesions, T-cell development, all very important aspects where the microbiota has an important function in. Glucose level regulation, very important in times of diabetes, where we have plenty of them around us, increasing numbers. There's a very strong link because gut microbiota can influence how our glucose is taken up by some glucose transporters such as LGLT1, and there's also a direct link to the insulin sensitivity. So maybe with the wrong gut microbiota, with a dysbiota, you have less active insulin that might lead to insulin resistance in the long term. Bacteria also produce a lot of vitamins. Mostly we get them from the diet, but a large amount of them is produced in the gut. It's a bit a second question to think if they're also well absorbed from the colon. I think there the verdict is still open, but especially vitamin K and some B vitamins are largely produced in the gut. Energy, maybe not so crucial nowadays because we rather suffer from having too much energy around us, but a couple of 100 or 1,000 years ago, you were happy to have your microbiota that gave you 10% additional energy from all the food items that the bacteria broke down, and the human body, the host, was able to absorb the metabolites, short-chain fatty acids, contributing about to 10% of the energy needs that we had per day. And this is seen also in mice model, in germ-free mice. They're typically leaner if they don't have the gut microbiota, but on the downside, they have an underdeveloped immune system and possibly some cognitive impairment. So maybe not what we should strive for. So we should be happy about our gut microbiota. Very important, the gut microbiota needs to feed on something. Energy needs to come from somewhere, and it comes mostly from dietary fiber, complex carbohydrates. And this is what feeds mostly the two main groups, which is the Firmicutes in green and the Bacteroidetes, just to mention the main ones. And you have to be careful, because what happens if you don't give them what they need, enough fiber to eat that is, they might do something that is maybe health detrimental, as shown by Mahesh Desai's group from the LIH. If you don't feed them fiber, they consume your own mucosal lining, which is somewhat resembling a complex carbohydrates akin to dietary fiber. So they deteriorate your gut if you don't feed them well enough, so to speak. So in this regard, maybe there are all these prebiotics that kind of have probiotic activity and foster maybe the growth of health beneficial bacteria. You possibly have seen LC1 from Nestle company or Danone that have all these probiotics with bifidobacteria, lactobacillus, and all of these kind of are thought to foster a healthy gut ecology locally, good for the immune system, causing the formation of healthy metabolites, and so forth. Even if there's not yet an EFSA health claim on that, maybe that's subject to come in the future. That seems a very promising direction to work with pre and probiotic. And if you don't like inulin and garlic for the taste, they're very good for the oligofructosaccharides that they contain. So they are good for your gut microbiota, even though you might not like their taste and smell. Another thing that is maybe quite interesting, all the short-chain fatty acids that the gut microbiota produce, as already mentioned, they have some very health beneficial properties. They can be anti-inflammatory. A lot of the chronic diseases nowadays have a chronic inflammatory component. So if you give, for example, something that is translated into butyrate, it has an effect on the colonic mucosa. It influences also your fatty acid, your tissue, your fat tissue, and adipocyte differentiation. So the wrong amount maybe might contribute to obesity here as well, and also a lot of pathways that are linking it to the immune system, different cytokine upregulations, and so forth. Then this is leading to a kind of project that we are currently doing that is termed Luxfico. So here, together with the DII department, we are working on a project where we investigate what is happening if we put people on a high versus low fiber diet, and in between to observe what are the individual factors, such as people carrying different microbiota, people having different genetic makeups, single nucleotide polymorphisms, and how is this linked then to the right-hand side to the health benefits. And this is what we study in Luxfico, but also together in the ORISCAF study that we have been conducted a while ago. So again, persons with high certain various single nucleotide polymorphisms with certain genetic makeup might be more prone maybe for the risk of inflammation and oxidative stress, and maybe might require more fiber than other people. Another very important thing is what gut microbiota might do with polyphenols. Maybe you know them from red wine, chocolate, all the nice stuff. And here's something important that could be happened, and I picked out one example here. Of course, all people are equal, but not necessarily equal. Producers, that is. Equal is a compound that is formed by specific bacteria. And the rationale is that equal, produced from soy isoflavonoids, has in the end like an estrogenic function that can influence your beta estradiol receptors, and that might be very important for hormonal cancers. And there's one theory that many Asian people who consume a lot of soy have for this reason lower rates of breast cancer and some other hormonal cancers. This is something we produced earlier at Ohio State University, soy germ fortified tomato juice. And then you have the double benefits of the carotenoid lycopene and the soy isoflavonoid equal as a compound. And then you have these bacterial species that are thought to be responsible for this production of equal. About half or quarter of the population is about able to produce this compound. And if you're not producing it, you might not reap the full benefits of some of these soy isoflavonoids. Last group here to present is the carotenoids. the colorful pigments that we have in many food items. They're linked to a lot of activities, so without going into detail, they might benefit the intestinal microbiota, the gut microbiota and the colon by acting as anti-inflammatory agents, antioxidants, because they interact with many transcription factors, with nuclear transfactors, nuclear receptors that are important for immune regulation, barrier function, could also be acting as prebiotics according to more recent findings. And the problem is that many people maybe don't consume, again, enough carotenoids within fruits and vegetables. So what could you do if the prophet doesn't go to the mountain? Maybe let's move the mountain to Muhammad. And this is kind of what we have been reviewing in one of our papers here. There are some strains that are known to produce carotenoids, and you could give them as a probiotic capsule, so that maybe the gut will produce carotenoids in the gut, and that could be maybe beneficial for people with inflammatory bowel diseases because of the local antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. And there are some strains that might be responsible for that. So this goes into what is termed like a precision editing of your gut microbiota. Last but not least, maybe not the most delicate topic, but possibly you have heard about it, fecal transplantation. It's exactly what you might think it is. There are some studies that have been shown that there are twins, identical twins that is, but maybe one is obese and the other is twin. And if you transplant their microbiota from the obese to a slim mouse, what happens? The mice have a higher risk of developing obesity as well. And from the slim one, if you feed this to a normal one, nothing happens, stays slim. So there's something to it, even though sometimes cause and consequence is not always so clear, that might be responsible in triggering adipositors to some extent in these transplanted mice. And it's even now done in humans with still a bit, I would say, ambiguous results, but some health insurances pay at least some of the pre-testings for that, so maybe it will be paid in the future. For all of us, how are the long-lasting effects? There are some positive benefits already shown for prevention of Clostridium difficile infection, positive effects on inflammatory bowel diseases. Unfortunately, for obesity, metabolic syndrome, the results are a bit less clear. And of course, the gut microbiota has been linked to many other diseases, just COVID-19, a more recent one, but also neurodegenerative diseases, arterial hypertensions. There's an interaction with drug therapy, how your drugs are effective. That might also be in part related to your gut microbiota. So it's promising, but I guess more targeted approaches in this domain are needed. So to sum up, there's a strong interaction between gut microbiota, diet and health. Dietary fiber, stick to your 5 a day, so maybe keeps your gut microbiota at bay, preventing it from degrading your own mucosa. Short-chain fatty acids, maybe linked to your genetic makeup in the way they are affecting you in the end, so worth to be taken into account, your genetic makeup. Polyphenols could be very interesting, metabolic to probiotics to foster certain metabolites, may be important for people at risk of certain cancers. Similar to carotenoids, maybe could be interesting to put people on a probiotic pill that aid in the production of carotenoids in the gut, especially if you are having IBD, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and some of those IBD diseases. And last but not least, the fecal transplant is promising, but I guess we are still at the beginning of the journey to really understand what we can do by that. And I think this goes to what clearly microbiomics for precision health, as it is called, and I'm sure we hear more about that in the future. So the more we see, the less we know as we find out as we go, similar to what Socrates said a long time ago. We are still at the beginning and more questions maybe come up that needs to be addressed. But I think we are on an interesting route, and so thanking you for your attention and open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting presentation. I was wondering, how far can we control our biota? Like, what type of, other than the intake factors that can control our biota, for example, genetic or environmental?
I'm sure there are many factors, and even though maybe I'm not the best expert focusing only on microbiota, of course it depends on a lot of drugs that you take, it depends on physical activity, of course, as we have seen, it depends on what you eat. Genetic predisposition certainly plays a role as well. It seems like it's not so easy to stir the gut microbiota consistently into a certain direction. It means you have to intervene and intervene again and again. Otherwise, it's kind of going back maybe to the starting point. That's some of the problems that you might have to face. So if you take maybe a probiotic or prebiotic, you might have to take it for a long time. And maybe this is one of the reasons why the fecal transplant maybe works to some extent, but then maybe the old kind of gut microbiota comes back, and maybe it's linked to your habit. And I'm sure there are also environmental factors, certain toxins that we take up, they can also be linked to the certain microbiota. So it's certainly strong interactions with a lot of environmental factors and also own factors.
Considering the gut microbiota begin to consume the host's muscle barrier when deprived of nutrition, could this possibly explain the pathophysiologically of IBD?
I'm not 100% sure. It might be a contributing factor. I mean, it's a long way to IBD. There are possibly many insults that have to happen. IBD have been increasing, I think, in the couple of last decades. So I'm sure there are things like allergens in the environment, and our way to handle these allergens play some role as well, meaning we make ourselves maybe more susceptible to damage the barrier by several means. Dietary fiber could be one of those, I think. Possibly not the only one. Of course, in addition to dietary fiber from the gut, we know that people who are on a diet that are rich in simple sugars, rich in fat, that this can also have negative consequences on the gut microbiota and also on the whole intestinal flora, motility, and so on. So I think also here it's a multifactorial disease that also we have not really fully comprehended why this is on the rise and what we can do to prevent it better.
Thank you for your valuable insights. So I have a question about role of the supplements in balancing our gut microbiota. So if I take example of turmeric, so it has curcuminoids, and if we consume as a whole versus in form of a supplement, so how it increases the bioavailability and reducing the risk of getting toxicity, because in supplement form, the individual component of that bioactive compound may interact in a different way in comparison when we consume as a whole, because every food, when we consume as a whole, absorbs in a different way.
That's a big issue. The bioavailability issue is indeed quite different if you look into food supplements versus many native food items. First of all, in nature you have many synergistic functions. Think about vitamin C and vitamin E. If you only supplement one of them, that might not work so well, because in nature often they go together and they kind of have synergistic effects in regenerating one another. That's one thing, but you have the food matrix, of course, as well. The food matrix can have a huge impact. If you take curcumin by itself, just as a dry powder, you will not be able to get that much into your system because it's very lipophilic. What you can do is you can either put it into oil or you consume it in an oily food matrix. You can, of course, eat the whole root. Maybe you put this into an oily soup or something, then you absorb a bit more. If you combine it with pepper, you get even more into the system because the black pepper overruns some of your excretion pumps, so that more gets into the system and less is re-excreted. So you can also sometimes trick with some of these additional vesicles that can help you to get them better absorbed. So for sure, the matrix is very important, mostly I would say for the lipophilic components. If you don't eat enough oil and put fat-free dressing in your salad, then sorry, you have lost the precious salad. It's pretty pointless. You save some calories, but you don't get the good things, the colorful carotenoids, vitamins into the body. So yes, these aspects are very important, the food metrics, but of course also the physical properties. If you grind it, if you cook it, I mean, think about tomatoes, a raw tomato, you get very little carotenoids into your system. The cells are very compact. In this case, if you cook it, if you eat it in the form of ketchup, which admittedly has a lot of sugar, is not so healthy, you get much more of these carotenoids into your system just because of processing. So sometimes the processing can also be a good thing. And certainly some kitchen procedures can help you to absorb some of these compounds better.